"You laughed at that car," the old reporter said softly into his microphone, his voice barely carrying across the crowded square. But 30 days later, the same car brought this entire city to a standstill. No one answered him. No one needed to. More than 5,000 people filled Holloway Plaza that warm Saturday afternoon. Families stood shoulder to shoulder beneath fluttering banners. Local business owners lined the sidewalks. Television crews adjusted their cameras. Even Mayor Richard Holloway stood silently near the stage, his prepared speech forgotten in his hands. The air carried the smell of fresh popcorn, grilled burgers, and summer pavement warmed by the California sun. Yet despite the noise of the festival, a strange stillness settled over the crowd. Every eye was fixed on the same thing. A 1967 Ford Mustang. 30 days earlier, most people would have called it junk. 30 days earlier, they would have laughed. Some of them had. Standing near the front row, Victoria Sinclair felt her pulse quicken as she stared at the car. The billionaire CEO of Sinclair Automotive was rarely nervous. She negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. She spoke before investors, governors, and industry leaders with effortless confidence. Yet now she stood completely still, unable to look away. Sunlight reflected off the Mustang's flawless midnight blue paint. Chrome details gleamed like polished silver. The engine purred with quiet confidence, not demanding attention but commanding it anyway. But it wasn't the beauty of the car that stunned her. It was the man standing beside it. Ethan Brooks, 42 years old, single father, mechanic, the same man she had mocked only a month earlier. Ethan stood calmly beside the driver's door, one hand resting lightly on the roof. His faded work shirt looked no different than it had 30 days ago. His posture remained relaxed. His expression remained humble. The applause surrounding him seemed almost distant to him, like he wasn't sure why everyone was making such a fuss. Beside him stood his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. Her bright smile seemed larger than the entire city around her. She held her father's hand tightly, unwilling to let go even for a moment. Victoria swallowed hard. Around her, reporters continued speaking excitedly into cameras. Residents pointed toward the Mustang. Elderly men wiped away unexpected tears. Teenagers raised their phones to record history unfolding before their eyes. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "I can't believe that's the same car." Another voice answered quietly, "It's not just the car." The words lingered in the air, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. This story had never really been about a Mustang. It had never been about chrome, engines, or restoration. It had been about dignity, about perseverance, about a father who refused to let other people decide the value of something he loved. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment. She remembered exactly where this story had begun. She remembered the laughter. She remembered the words she wished she could take back. And as the crowd continued staring at Ethan Brooks with admiration, Victoria Sinclair found herself thinking about a moment exactly 30 days earlier, on a bright afternoon when she first saw a battered old Mustang roll into a luxury car exhibition and made a mistake that would change far more than a single man's life. 30 days earlier, the annual Sinclair Automotive Heritage Expo had transformed the downtown convention grounds into a celebration of wealth, innovation, and prestige. Rows of exotic sports cars gleamed beneath spotless white tents. Collectors discussed rare engines worth more than most family homes. Local reporters moved from display to display interviewing owners whose names often appeared in business magazines. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered. The kind of event where people quietly measured one another before a single word was spoken. Just after 10 o'clock that morning, a low rumble echoed from the far end of the parking area. Heads turned. Conversations paused. A faded blue 1967 Mustang slowly rolled through the entrance gate. Rust-lined portions of the lower body panels. The paint had lost much of its shine years ago. One headlight trim was slightly crooked. The engine sounded tired but determined, like it had traveled a long road and still refused to quit. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Brooks. Beside him sat Sophie, clutching a small notebook against her chest. Her excitement filled the car. Ethan parked near the edge of the exhibition lot, away from the expensive displays. He switched off the engine and smiled at his daughter. "Ready?" Sophie nodded immediately. "This place is amazing." They stepped out together. The warm California breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee and polished leather. For a few moments, Sophie admired everything around her. Then she noticed something. People were staring at their Mustang. Some smiled politely. Others looked amused. Ethan pretended not to notice. He had spent years learning that pride was quieter than ego. Not everyone understood the difference. Across the exhibition grounds, Victoria Sinclair arrived surrounded by executives, investors, and reporters. Cameras followed her as she moved through the displays. At 37, she had built Sinclair Automotive into one of the most influential automotive companies in the country. People listened when she spoke. People laughed when she joked. As she approached the center of the event, her attention drifted toward the edge of the lot. The Mustang immediately caught her eye. Not because it impressed her, because it did not belong. Victoria slowed her pace. Several executives followed her gaze. One of them chuckled softly. Another shook his head. "How did that thing get in here?" someone asked. Victoria folded her arms. For a second, she studied the old car. Then a faint smile appeared on her face. "That belongs in a scrapyard, not at a heritage expo," she said. The comment was not shouted. It did not need to be. The people around her laughed immediately. A few nearby guests joined in. The reaction spread faster than the words themselves. Ethan heard it. Sophie heard it too. The smile disappeared from the little girl's face. She looked down at the cracked pavement beneath her sneakers. Ethan glanced toward Victoria. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd. Victoria expected irritation, perhaps embarrassment. Instead, Ethan simply nodded politely before returning his attention to Sophie. That unexpected response caught her off guard. Most people either argued or apologized when they felt judged. Ethan did neither. He simply placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder and guided her toward the exhibition. Behind them, the laughter slowly faded. But Sophie remained unusually quiet. And although Victoria continued greeting investors and reporters, she found herself looking back at the old Mustang more than once, unable to explain why the image of that calm mechanic and his daughter refused to leave her mind. The drive home felt longer than usual. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the highway in golden bands as Ethan guided the Mustang through familiar streets toward the small neighborhood where he and Sophie lived. The old engine hummed steadily beneath the hood, unconcerned by the opinions of strangers. For several miles, neither of them spoke. Sophie sat quietly looking out the passenger window. Her notebook remained closed in her lap. Ethan noticed. Normally, she filled every car ride with questions, observations, and stories from school. Today, the silence felt heavier. The Mustang turned onto a narrow road lined with oak trees before finally pulling into the driveway of their modest home. The small garage behind the house showed its age. The paint had faded years ago. One corner of the roof needed repairs. Yet it was home. Ethan switched off the engine and waited. Sophie remained seated. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked gently. She hesitated before answering. "Dad, yeah." Her eyes stayed fixed on the dashboard. "Is our Mustang really junk?" The question landed harder than any insult ever could. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. Not because he did not have an answer, because he wanted to give her the right one. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Wind chimes hanging from the porch swayed softly. The evening felt calm, but something important had just happened. Ethan stepped out of the car and walked around to her side. He opened the door and offered his hand. "Come with me." Sophie followed him into the garage. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight that slipped through the high windows. Shelves lined the walls. Old tools rested exactly where they had been for years. The Mustang occupied the center of the space like a trusted old friend. Ethan rested his hand on the fender. "Do you know why I never sold this car?" Sophie shook her head. "Because Mom loved it." The little girl looked up. Ethan smiled softly. "Your mother and I drove this car on our first road trip together. We drove it after we got married. We drove it home the day we learned you were on the way." Sophie listened carefully. Every scratch tells part of our story. The garage grew quiet. Ethan opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. The edges were worn from time. Sophie took it carefully. In the picture, her mother stood beside the Mustang laughing in the summer sun. The car looked younger then. So did everyone else. Sophie stared at the photo for several seconds. "I miss her." "I know." Ethan nodded. "Me too." The words hung gently between them. Not painful, just honest. Sophie glanced back at the car. "Then why do people laugh at it?" Ethan leaned against the workbench. "Because sometimes people only see what something looks like today. They never take the time to learn its story." Sophie considered that. So what are we going to do? For the first time all day, a spark appeared in Ethan's eyes. He looked toward the Mustang with quiet determination. Then he smiled. 30 days from now, this city is going to see what this car really is. Sophie blinked. How? Ethan simply reached for a wrench and opened the toolbox. The metal clicked softly in the evening light. That, he said with a calm smile, is exactly what we are about to find out. The next morning began before sunrise. Ethan stood alone in the garage while the rest of the neighborhood slept. A single overhead light cast a warm glow across the Mustang's worn body panels. The air smelled faintly of motor oil, old steel, and fresh coffee. He ran his hand across the hood for a moment before opening his toolbox. 30 days was not much time. Most professional restoration shops would have laughed at the schedule. Ethan did not. He simply got to work. During the day, he repaired customer vehicles at the local garage. During the evening, he helped Sophie with homework, cooked dinner, and handled the 1,000 small responsibilities that came with raising a child alone. Then, when most people settled into their living rooms to watch television, Ethan returned to the garage. Night after night, the rhythm remained the same. Remove a damaged part. Clean it. Repair it. Reinstall it. Measure twice. Tighten carefully. Move forward. Sophie became his faithful assistant. She organized tools, labeled storage bins, and handed him wrenches when needed. Sometimes she sat on a stool doing homework while he worked nearby. Other times, she simply watched. The old Mustang slowly began to change. Small improvements appeared first. Rust disappeared from sections of the body. Weathered trim pieces regained their shine. Mechanical parts that had not worked properly in years suddenly came back to life. Yet Ethan never posted photos online. He never asked for attention. He never spoke about his plans outside their home. That silence only fueled curiosity. A few neighbors noticed the garage lights burning late into the night. Caleb Turner, Ethan's longtime friend, stopped by one evening carrying 2 cups of coffee. He stared at the growing collection of parts spread across the workbenches. You know people are talking, right? Caleb asked. Ethan continued tightening a bolt. About what? Caleb laughed softly. About you. About this car. Half the town thinks you are building something special. The other half thinks you have completely lost your mind. Sophie grinned from her stool. Dad has a plan. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Does he? Ethan smiled, but offered no explanation. Outside, spring gradually gave way to early summer. Days passed. Then more days. Word continued spreading. People driving past the house slowed down to glance toward the garage. Some waved. Some asked questions. Ethan answered politely, but never revealed much. He preferred actions over promises. Meanwhile, every evening before bed, Sophie updated a small countdown calendar hanging on the refrigerator. 24 days left. 21 days left. 18 days left. The numbers kept shrinking. One night, as Ethan carefully removed part of the interior paneling, Sophie looked up from her notebook. Are you nervous? She asked. Ethan paused. The garage became quiet except for the ticking of a cooling work lamp. A little, he admitted. Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Me too. Ethan smiled. That is okay. Good things usually make people nervous. Then he lifted a hidden metal panel deeper inside the Mustang and noticed something unusual tucked beneath years of dust and insulation. His hand froze. For the first time since the project began, genuine surprise crossed his face. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at what he had found. Sophie slid off her stool and walked over. Dust covered a small metal container hidden deep behind the interior panel. The box looked old, older than many of the parts surrounding it. Carefully, Ethan lifted it free and carried it to the workbench. The garage felt unusually quiet. Even the familiar hum of the overhead light seemed distant. Sophie watched closely as her father opened the lid. Inside rested a collection of yellowed papers, several photographs, and a folded envelope sealed decades earlier. Ethan slowly unfolded the first document. His eyes narrowed, then widened. Sophie immediately noticed the change. What is it? She asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He studied the paper again, as if making sure he had read it correctly. I think this car belonged to someone important. The following evening, after finishing work at the garage, Ethan began researching every name and detail contained in the documents. One name appeared repeatedly: Daniel Mercer. Decades earlier, Daniel Mercer had been one of the most respected automotive engineers in the region. Local newspapers credited him with helping save hundreds of manufacturing jobs during a difficult economic period. He had become something of a hometown legend before quietly disappearing from public life. Ethan sat at the kitchen table reading old newspaper archives late into the night. Across from him, Sophie listened with growing fascination. "You mean our car belonged to him?" she asked. "It looks that way," Ethan replied. "And somehow nobody remembers." Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Sinclair found herself thinking about the Mustang more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was simple curiosity, nothing more. Yet every time she drove past Ethan's neighborhood, her attention drifted toward the small garage with lights glowing long after sunset. One evening, she finally slowed her car near the curb. Through the open garage door, she could see Ethan working quietly while Sophie organized tools nearby. Neither seemed aware they were being watched. Victoria remained in her vehicle for a moment. The scene felt strangely peaceful. No cameras, no investors, no social media posts, just a father and daughter working together. Something about it unsettled her. In her world, people usually wanted recognition. They wanted attention. Ethan appeared interested only in the work itself. A few days later, she stopped again. This time, Ethan noticed her. He wiped his hands with a shop towel and walked outside. "Good evening," he said politely. Victoria stepped from her car. "You have been busy." Ethan glanced toward the Mustang. "A little." She circled the vehicle slowly. The transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. Fresh paint preparation, restored trim, mechanical upgrades, careful craftsmanship everywhere. "You are putting a lot of effort into a car most people would replace," Victoria said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Most people are not me." For a moment, neither spoke. The evening breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Victoria studied him carefully. "Why are you really doing this?" Ethan looked toward Sophie, who was smiling while sorting old photographs on the workbench. His expression softened immediately. "Because some things are worth more than people realize." Victoria followed his gaze. For the first time, she did not see an old car. She saw a story, and for reasons she could not fully explain, she suddenly wanted to know how it ended. The discovery inside the Mustang changed everything. Over the next several days, Ethan spent every spare hour studying the documents he had found. Some were engineering sketches. Others were personal notes written in neat handwriting decades earlier. The more he read, the more remarkable the story became. Daniel Mercer had not simply owned the car. He had used it while developing manufacturing techniques that helped keep local factories open during one of the hardest economic periods in the city's history. Hundreds of families had kept their livelihoods because of ideas first sketched in notebooks that had somehow remained hidden inside the Mustang all these years. Yet very few people seemed to remember his contribution. Time had buried his legacy beneath newer headlines and larger fortunes. One evening, Ethan spread the documents across the workbench while Sophie studied the old photographs. The garage smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. Outside, crickets sang beneath the warm summer sky. "Why would someone hide all this?" Sophie asked. Ethan carefully examined another photograph. "Maybe they wanted the right person to find it." Sophie smiled. "Maybe that person was you." Ethan laughed softly. "Or maybe it was you." The little girl looked down at the photograph again. In one image, Daniel Mercer stood beside the Mustang in front of a manufacturing plant that no longer existed. Workers surrounded him. Some were smiling. Some were shaking his hand. Everyone looked proud. Sophie pointed at the picture. "He looks kind." Ethan nodded. "The best people usually do." Meanwhile, Victoria found herself returning to the garage more often. She never announced her visits. Sometimes she simply drove by. Sometimes she stopped for a few minutes. Each visit left her with more questions than answers. On one particular evening, she arrived just as Ethan finished polishing a newly restored section of chrome trim. The transformation was becoming extraordinary. The Mustang no longer looked forgotten. It looked respected. Victoria stepped closer. "I have seen professional restorations that were not this detailed." Ethan smiled without looking up. "This one is personal." Victoria studied him carefully. "You found something, did you not?" For a moment, Ethan considered avoiding the question. Then he glanced towards Sophie, who was organizing the historical documents nearby. "Maybe." Victoria noticed the photographs. She noticed the old papers. Most importantly, she noticed the pride in Sophie's eyes. Not pride in owning something valuable. Pride in preserving something meaningful. The realization lingered in her thoughts long after she left. The next morning, she instructed her research department to investigate Daniel Mercer. By late afternoon, the reports began arriving. Victoria sat silently in her office reading page after page. The deeper she looked, the more surprised she became. Daniel Mercer had helped shape the very industry that eventually allowed companies like hers to thrive. Yet his name appeared nowhere in modern celebrations, nowhere in museums, nowhere in public memory. Victoria slowly leaned back in her chair. 30 days earlier, she had seen an old car. Now she was beginning to understand that Ethan Brooks might be restoring something far more important than a vehicle. He might be bringing an entire piece of forgotten history back into the light. As the final days approached, the story began spreading far beyond Ethan's neighborhood. It started with small conversations at diners, hardware stores, and coffee shops. Then it moved online. Someone posted a photograph of the Mustang sitting inside the garage beside old historical documents. Another shared a picture of Sophie carefully cleaning chrome trim with a smile on her face. Soon everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some residents believed Ethan was preserving an important piece of local history. Others dismissed the entire project as sentimental nostalgia. The debate grew larger each day. "It is still just an old car," one businessman remarked during a radio interview. "History belongs in museums." A retired factory worker immediately disagreed. "History belongs wherever people are willing to remember it." Across town, local journalist Emily Parker became increasingly interested. She had spent years covering city council meetings and economic reports, but something about Ethan's story felt different. It felt human. More importantly, it felt honest. One afternoon, she visited the old manufacturing district where Daniel Mercer had once worked. Many buildings were gone now. Some had become warehouses. Others stood empty beneath decades of weather and time. Yet when Emily spoke with older residents, she kept hearing the same name, Daniel Mercer, again and again. Every conversation revealed another forgotten contribution. Every interview uncovered another family whose livelihood had once depended on ideas Mercer helped develop. Emily returned to her office carrying pages of notes. By evening, she realized Ethan had uncovered something much bigger than anyone originally imagined. Meanwhile, the countdown calendar inside the Brooks household continued shrinking. 8 days remained, then 7, then 6. The garage became a place of quiet purpose. Ethan worked carefully, never rushing despite the approaching deadline. Sophie continued helping every evening after school. Their routine had become something special. They were not simply restoring a vehicle. They were preserving memories, honoring people, and building new memories of their own along the way. One evening, Victoria arrived carrying a folder. She found Ethan adjusting a restored dashboard component while Sophie organized historical photographs nearby. "I thought you might want these," Victoria said. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were copies of corporate archives from Sinclair Automotive. Daniel Mercer's name appeared throughout the documents. Research reports, engineering references, letters of recognition, evidence that his influence had reached farther than anyone realized. Ethan looked up. "You did all this?" Victoria nodded. He deserved better than being forgotten. For a moment, neither spoke. The garage filled with the soft sounds of tools, distant traffic, and summer insects outside. Then Sophie smiled. "Thank you." Victoria returned the smile. The simple gratitude affected her more than any boardroom praise ever had. As she prepared to leave, she paused near the garage door and looked back at Ethan. The Mustang now gleamed beneath the lights. The transformation was remarkable. Yet what impressed her most was not the craftsmanship. It was the man behind it. Ethan had never asked for recognition. He had never demanded respect. He had simply continued doing the right thing long after others stopped paying attention. And somewhere deep inside, Victoria began realizing that the person she had judged so quickly might be the most remarkable man she had met in years. The 30th day arrived beneath clear blue skies and warm California sunshine. From early morning, Holloway Plaza buzzed with anticipation. Food vendors prepared for the annual city festival. Families filled the sidewalks. Local musicians tuned instruments near the main stage. Television crews adjusted cameras and checked microphones. Yet despite all the scheduled attractions, most conversations revolved around a single question. What exactly had Ethan Brooks been working toward for the past month? By noon, thousands of residents had gathered throughout downtown. Some came because they loved classic cars. Others came because they had followed Emily Parker's reporting on Daniel Mercer. Many arrived simply because curiosity had become impossible to resist. Back at the garage, Ethan stood quietly beside the completed Mustang. Sunlight spilled through the open garage door, reflecting across the deep midnight blue paint. Every chrome detail shined. Every body panel looked flawless. Yet Ethan's attention remained on Sophie. She adjusted a small display folder containing photographs and historical documents they planned to share with the public. "Ready?" Ethan asked. Sophie smiled. "I have been ready for weeks." Ethan laughed softly. Together they climbed into the car. The engine started with a smooth, confident rumble unlike anything heard 30 days earlier. As they pulled away from the house, neighbors stepped onto porches and waved. Some applauded. Others simply smiled. The drive toward downtown felt almost surreal. When they reached the edge of the festival grounds, volunteers directed them toward a designated entrance. Word spread quickly through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. People pointed toward the approaching Mustang. One by one, phones appeared in the air. Near the main stage, Victoria Sinclair stood beside Mayor Richard Holloway. She had been invited to speak about local industry and economic development. Yet when she saw the Mustang approaching, every prepared remark suddenly felt unimportant. The car rolled slowly into the plaza. Sunlight danced across its restored surfaces. The engine settled into a calm idle. But it was not the vehicle itself that transformed the atmosphere. It was the story attached to it. Emily Parker stepped onto the stage carrying copies of the historical documents. Her voice echoed through the speakers. She spoke about Daniel Mercer. She spoke about forgotten innovation, local sacrifice, and generations of workers whose lives had been shaped by one man's ideas. Large screens displayed photographs recovered from inside the car. Gasps moved through the audience. Elderly residents recognized faces from decades earlier. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded quietly as memories returned. Then Emily revealed the final discovery. Daniel Mercer had personally documented many of his ideas inside notebooks hidden within the vehicle, believing future generations deserved to remember where progress truly began. The crowd fell silent. Not the silence of boredom. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of understanding. Thousands of people stood together realizing they were witnessing something far greater than a restored automobile. Ethan had not revived a machine. He had revived a legacy. And as the city stood motionless beneath the afternoon sun, Victoria Sinclair felt the full weight of her mistake from 30 days earlier settle quietly upon her heart. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The plaza remained completely silent. Thousands of people stood beneath the afternoon sun, looking not at a celebrity, not at a politician, but at a father who had quietly reminded an entire city of its own history. Ethan shifted slightly beside the Mustang and glanced toward Sophie. The little girl squeezed his hand. Her eyes sparkled with pride, not because of the attention, not because of the applause waiting to happen, but because she knew how many late nights, how many hours, and how much heart had gone into every part of the journey. Then the silence broke. One person began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire plaza erupted into applause. The sound rolled across downtown like a wave. People rose to their feet. Some smiled. Some cheered. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. Ethan looked uncomfortable with the attention. That only seemed to make people admire him more. Near the stage, Victoria Sinclair stood motionless for a moment before taking a slow breath and walking toward him. The crowd gradually quieted again. Cameras followed her every step. Reporters raised microphones. Yet Victoria ignored all of it. When she reached Ethan, she looked directly into his eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice carried clearly across the plaza. 30 days ago, I looked at this car and saw nothing but age and rust. I looked at you and assumed I knew your story." The crowd listened carefully. Victoria continued. "I was wrong." Ethan said nothing. He simply listened. "You restored something far more valuable than a vehicle," Victoria said. "You reminded all of us that real value is not always visible at first glance." A gentle breeze moved through the square. The banners above the stage fluttered softly. Ethan finally smiled. "We all miss things sometimes." The simplicity of the response caught many people by surprise. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge, only grace. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before smiling back. Then she turned toward the Mustang once more. "I would like to buy it," she said. A few people laughed softly. Others leaned forward waiting for the answer. Ethan glanced at Sophie. Sophie immediately shook her head. The crowd laughed again. Ethan smiled. "I do not think so." Victoria nodded, already expecting that response. "Worth asking." More laughter rippled through the audience. Then Ethan looked at her and added, "But maybe I will let you ride in it sometime." This time, even Victoria laughed. The tension dissolved completely. As the afternoon continued, residents lined up to view the historical photographs and documents. Former factory workers shared stories with younger generations. Families took pictures beside the Mustang. Conversations filled the plaza for hours. Yet long after the festival ended, people remembered something far more important than the car itself. They remembered the lesson. They remembered the dignity of a man who never needed to prove his worth. They remembered a daughter who believed in her father when others doubted him. And they remembered that sometimes the most remarkable things in life are hidden beneath ordinary surfaces, waiting for someone patient enough to see their true value.